Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Josh Heuman, and I'm very pleased to be working with the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair to organize a series of programs like this. So tonight we'll be talking about artists' strategies for pricing artwork. On November 8th, you may have already seen the promotion that's gone out into the world. We'll be talking about carving a path toward international representation. And then we're looking forward to two more programs in early 2024, in January and in February. Before it slips my mind, and I'll repeat it again at the end, if you are looking to participate in the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair in 2024, the deadline is December 1st for applications, so please do consider that. It is an enormous art fair with really such a spectacular range of artists, media, styles, price ranges, and that really brings us to tonight's topic of how do artists price their work. So I have often said that, as I was just saying, is people like to have their Starbucks coffee, and they like to know that there is a dry cleaner around the corner, but they don't necessarily think about what the costs are for the people who are doing that work. And I think the same is true for artists, where people see this completed work of art and they have absolutely no clue what has gone into making it, in terms of the education level, in terms of the skill and technique and materials, and then of course, things like costs of booths at art fairs or commissions that are taken by art galleries and so on. So that's what sort of keeps this whole ecosystem going, hopefully strong, although we may hear some different perspectives tonight. So I'm really pleased to have two speakers with us tonight, both experienced in their own realms, bringing, we'll say, different perspectives. I assume that there will be some overlap. I don't know for sure.
I'm sure.
They are sure there will be some overlap. But then I'll ask a few questions, and of course we'll open the floor for all of you to ask questions as well. So for starters, I will turn our attention to Sandra Tarantino.
Thank you. So my name is... Nice and audio, thank you. I'm Sandra Tarantino. I am a visual artist and also an educator. And I have been creating artwork for about 25 years or so now is when I graduated from OCAD. And I graduated in drawing and painting and was predominantly practicing painting as my main medium for about a decade. And then for various reasons, which I'll get into, I switched over to ceramics. So I have that perspective of two different mediums. Does she introduce or do I go and just me first? Okay, I'm going to get into it then a little bit. Okay. So I think graduating from OCAD, I was part of a collective, an artist collective, where we joined together forces, and we were able to open up a studio and a small gallery in a DIY fashion, and help subsidize our costs to be able to create work and show them and sell them for a number of years, for AWOL for about 15 years. It's called AWOL Gallery, and it was in the now very popular Ossington Queen District area. And starting out, TOF was one of my first initial kind of break into the art market right away. I had my first show in 2000. And it's been a wonderful way to build connections in the arts community, sharing of information about other shows, other possibilities and other opportunities, learning about different mediums, and a great way to gauge pricing, obviously, right from the get-go when you're coming out of school. Because that's the big question, right? You've honed all of your practice over the course of your school, and you're coming out now, you're building up, and you want to be able to make a living. So I think just gauging out, first off, right off the bat, I created a little handout for you so you can have something to take away from. But the main thing you want to do starting out is researching other artists who are working in a similar fashion to you. So what looks familiar for size, for scale, for process, for cost of materials. You're looking at also, you must look at also where they are in their art career. So if you have an artist who is working in a certain style and has, exhibited profusely, is now, perhaps represented by a gallery already, you're not going to come out of school and price it right off the bat at their pricing. You're going to start off lower, and that's going to help you to build up your price point and gauge as you go. After a number of years, was represented with my paintings in Toronto and exhibited at Art Toronto, which is happening this coming weekend and whatnot. So that automatically started to change certain things for me because you're wanting to cover your costs, and a gallery, rightfully so, will take a commission. And depending, some galleries will take 40%, some galleries will take 50%, but they are fronting the cost on a lot of things. And sometimes artists like, why are galleries taking so much from us? But there are rental costs, staffing costs, advertising costs. Just doing a show like an art fair is thousands of dollars. So, acknowledging their work, because they don't make, there's sometimes the margins are, we were just talking about how gallery margins are very small and artist margins are very small. They will take 50%. There is a window I found that was a big leap when you are, let's say, starting out at the lower end of pricing for your style of work and your cost, and trying to slowly build that up. And then you get representation. And now 50% of that revenue is going to come, and you have to bump up your prices accordingly. But what is that magic number when that occurs to make sure that you're not going to just kill your market right off the bat with a 50% increase and doubling up your cost? So that is definitely a very real factor that you need to consider and build up towards. Usually how I gauged it initially is that if I felt like I was selling consistently and selling at a certain price point, quite a few pieces, then I could start to increase by increments of like 5% or 10% after like 6 months or a year. And buyers expect that, right? They want to see that the investment that they're making in you as an artist is also paying off for them. I think, it was a very conservative market here in Toronto. They like to see that there is that buyer, and then there's the buyer who's going to buy your work because they love it and are passionate about it. And that, you do end up meeting so many different types of buyers, especially like Toronto Outdoor Art Show or Art Fair, art show. I'm still going back from years ago, but Art Fair is definitely a really great way to gauge that and meet these different types of buyers. Okay, so I think when you're starting off, you don't want to create a price point with emotion. You could feel really attached for this piece and don't want to put a huge price on it because you don't want it to sell. Don't do that. Like if you really love a piece and you want to hold on to it for a little while. My partner is also an artist, and usually what he does is that if there's like a key piece that was like a breaking, like this transition into something that happened in a series, he'll hold on to it, keep it. Don't try and sell. Use that as inspiration to kind of build that body of work a little bit more. And you don't want to, undersell yourself where you're just really wanting to get stuff out there. I do understand. And it, I tend to, when I started out, I did go a little bit lower and then built up accordingly because I'm like, well, I can't keep on doing this if I'm not making money off of it. So figuring out that good point is key. And you want to start off again on the lower end and then build up gradually. I think I've talked quite a bit about that. So I think it's very, very important to keep your pricing consistent. If you do get a gallery who wants to come and sees your work and is interested in you, that's how I was picked up. I think there's going to be another discussion about how to approach artists. I waited till galleries approached me, which was really lovely over the course of many years doing shows like the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair. And just making sure that you keep the pricing consistent of what is in your studio compared to what is in the gallery, just to keep your relationships positive and you're not underselling all the work that your gallery is doing and building up your name and your work and your representation and in the city. You don't want to undercut them. So there's different formulas out there that people use. Maybe some of you have heard some of them that go by the square inch or the linear inch on your work, or they do more of like an hourly wage. You have to kind of trial and error do both. I know that there's some artists who will compare and do both a little bit at the simultaneously to see what works for them. The first one that is like a square inch. So if you're getting something, for example, there's an example on your handout that is like a 20 by 24. You figure out that number and then you set a price point. Maybe it's like $2 a square foot or $3 a square foot, and start off from there and see if that seems like a reasonable price to start off relative to other artists who are working in the same vein in their career timeline. And then you want to also you figure that out and add supply costs. And as we know, supply costs have increased quite a bit over COVID. I know that I've had maybe a third of increase in my material for sure. So that price point is going to kind of filter down into your pricing. So you can do that. You can also do adding. If you're working in a lot of different sizes, you can do linear formulas where you're adding and then you multiply it by a cost as well. Or you do formula B. Another formula is doing by the hour. Okay, so try those as a starting point and see how it goes when you're heading into shows. Okay, yeah. And on a side note, it's really, really great to have a lot of range of sizes when you're going into a show and various price points. That's really important because somebody might fall in love with your work and just can't afford maybe $2,000 right now, but they can do, $200 to $500 range and then work up. My work has changed. I've gone again from painting larger pieces to ceramic. And that has been a really interesting transition for me because I work very small, much smaller now, and my work can be collected with small pieces that can build into larger installations. So it's made it very, very accessible for buyers that can afford a different range. So and my cost of storage has gone down where I've gone, and even just like transporting things to shows is a completely different ball game, because when I was doing big paintings I would have to rent trucks and all these things, and now so I'm working differently. So that will factor into as you build your career in your medium. So figuring out all of these expenses, and hopefully you can work through some ways to troubleshoot that so that it's a little bit easier for you and ultimately getting that higher profit margin for yourself. Okay?
Great. So I'm going to ask you one question and then we'll move on to Mackenzie.
Sure.
So when it comes to, let's say, smaller works, I'll say as an aspiring collector who does not have mountains of money to draw upon, what happens if someone comes along and says, oh, I love these and I would like to buy 4 of them?
Yes.
So
with my work, usually what I do is I have a little bit of a range that if they buy up to 3 pieces, I'll do like a discounted price, and I'll say 10% for for 3 to 5, and then beyond that, maybe I'll go 15%. I try not to do too much more than that, just because it's cutting into my margins, which get tighter and tighter.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, and your cost of living as well, and your studio practice. So, yeah, I usually try and just create that as a standard across the board. So it's not wishy-washy with different people, and it keeps it consistent. You know, somehow those relationships merge, where if you do one thing with somebody and do a completely different thing with somebody else, people tend to, it seems like a big city, but it's not. And people will get upset, right? And it's not fair. So just keeping something like that, setting that as a precedent for yourself, and moving always and keeping it consistent is really important.
Yeah, so it's definitely nice to have that larger injection of money by selling multiple works, but to be able to give a reasonable incentive.
For sure,
discount, but
100%.
not to damage yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
So, awesome. Thank you. So Mackenzie.
Hi everybody. My name is Mackenzie Sinclair, and I'm the Associate Director of the Art Dealers Association of Canada. I'm really happy to be here. So the Art Dealers Association is a non-for-profit association of over 60 galleries across Canada. Some who deal with contemporary art, emerging artists, some who deal with historical art, artists who are no longer with us. So there's a broad range of gallerists that I work with and that I deal with. So some of them definitely have varying ideas as to price points, but I think we've narrowed it down to like a nice umbrella to explain to a general audience. So something to remember or to look for is the 4 C's, is what we kind of call it. Context, consensus, comparables, and care. And I'll go through those, and sorry, I have notes here. I just want to make sure that I get everything right. So context. So where are your pieces placed? Are they placed in your studio? Is that where you're selling them from? Are they placed in a fair? Are they placed in a gallery, an auction house, donations, estates, insurance, accounting? So what do all of those values look like to you on your books? And then there's a couple of types of values that you have to consider. So your net realizable, so your cost of materials and your labor, minus your time that you've spent on it as well. Replacement value. If you're on your way to a fair and it breaks, what's the replacement value of that work? Your fair market value. So we do have some artists who are still with us who have their pieces sold. They get popular, they sell more pieces. The pieces that they sold prior are now more valuable. They go for an appraisal, and that's an FMV, a fair market value. So that value can go up, and that can also fluctuate your pieces that you're currently making. Your labor and cost value, like I said, and then speculative value. So sometimes gallerists, buyers will say, I love your work. I think your work's going to be more in 10 years. So I'm going to buy it now in hopes of selling it down the road. There's those factors to also consider from a buyer's standpoint or a gallerist standpoint. Consensus. So in terms of deciding a value, getting a general consensus from gallerists, artists, colleagues. So with ADAC, if a gallerist got a new artist and they saw that two of our member galleries also had that artist, they go and talk to them. How is their market doing? How are you finding your buyers? Are they popular? Are they not so popular? Are they better at Art Toronto in October? Or are they better at Armory in the spring in New York? So getting a general consensus on an artist and their value in other galleries is also something that comes into play on our side. Talking with other artists, as you said, checking out your community. Is somebody doing the similar work to you? Are they in the same place in their career? Have they been practicing for 15 years when you've been only practicing for 3? Kind of comparing yourself to that. And then going to other dealers, so, people in your community, like I said, or even buyers. So if you have people who come into your studio to buy, if you're making a new body of work, get pulse checks on people. Are you interested in this? Do you see this fitting into your collection, your friends' collections? Have you seen anything like this? Just getting a general consensus of the feel of the work can also help you determine popularity or just overall sellability. Comparables. So that's a nice context segue rather in, searching for comparables, finding similar artworks. So stage of the career, your media used. If somebody is 15 years in drawing and you're 15 years in ceramics, it's potatoes and tomatoes. Sound the same? Not the same. Like that's very important to realize. Shows. Go to galleries. Like just go out and immerse yourself in the art world. See what people are showing. Is there a lot of pop art? Is there a lot of ceramics? It also depends on where you are. A lot of artist run centers or art spaces that are not commercial, that are more artist run, they have a lot more variety because sometimes galleries really curate their space to a certain aesthetic is a good way to describe it. So just getting yourself out to as many places as possible to get a real pulse on where your art is in comparison to the art world. In Toronto or in Canada, Toronto's our closest because it's in our backyard. And then an outside opinion can be something like if you don't have gallery representation but want it, it's not, or want an opinion of it, it's hard to just walk in and say, hey, can you evaluate this? But going to fairs, galleries, you can build relationships and ultimately build up a relationship with somebody who can sit down with you, even if they're not representing you, and say, I believe that your art is similar to XYZ, and getting their professional opinion on it as well. I know it's super hard to separate your love from your art, but I think that getting an arm's length opinion it can be really good to just separate yourself and to help you establish where you want to start out or where you believe that your art is currently. And then care. Care is really important, similar to what you're saying about your relationships, and keeping your pricing where you say it is. You don't want to go to a friend and say, here's this sculpture for free, and then 2 weeks later have a very similar sculpture and be like, it's $550. It will get around. You will dilute your market if you do a lot of those tradesies. We've seen artists, unfortunately, completely destroy their market. They've given their dentist a painting, and then they've given their accountant a painting, and then all of a sudden everybody has their paintings, but they've never sold it, so it's hard to kind of keep that. So just keep that in mind. Your work is valuable, so just don't give it away for free. It's very hard to be 100% in your pricing right off the bat, and that's anything in life. It's hard to be 100% in anything, but you just want to be careful when deciding. You don't want to price yourself too low, you don't want to price yourself too high. So being, strong in where you think you'd like your work to be, whether that be on the square United Inch or square inch, there we go. So those formulas or the hourly formulas, that can help determine. But when you do stick with a price, you're kind of stuck with it for at least 6 months. Like you shouldn't be switching your price up every 3 months. It's too short. 6 months, I would even say, is probably a little bit too short in my opinion. Probably a year and a half, just to build up again, like I said, your popularity, your network, people who are buying, and then you want your buyers to also see, your work is accumulating value. I personally, if I was to ever suggest to somebody to buy an artwork, the first thing out of my mouth is, do you love it? If you don't love it, that's okay. If you're buying it for an investment, okay, but if you love it and the investment doesn't work out, you still love it. And that's the bottom line. So that's something as a dealer or somebody who works with galleries and clients, that's my bottom line, is if you love it, that's amazing, and if there's an investment purpose to it, and it works out, great, and if it doesn't, that's okay, you still love it. However, I don't know if we're going to agree on this one. I believe, and I think that this is partly due to the business that I'm in, is discounts are actually really important. You need to have some form of wiggle room in terms of your pricing to give a discount, whether it's 10 to 15%. I know that's probably a bit on the high side in terms of margins, but in terms of a gallery, it's important that we are able to show our clients that we are able to work with them for them, and getting them the piece that they love in their collection. So building in that little bit of a wiggle room, you know, discounts make deals, deals puts art on the wall and gets everybody paid. So then, what's my other things? You don't change your price as soon as you quote it. If you've quoted it, you have to stick with it. So if you say my painting is $500 at the Toronto Outdoor Fair, and then 2 weeks go by, the person who saw it at the fair remembers it's at $500 and they visit you in your studio, it can't be $750. It also shouldn't be $250. It needs to still stay $500. Don't change. Stick to what you've stated. It builds trust, and it builds your confidence in your work, and it helps just build a reputable reputation. Immerse yourself in the market, like I said. And then we talked about before United Inch versus Square Inch. I personally think that United Inch is probably a better way of pricing your artwork just due to scale. United Inches, instead of doing it, if it's a 20 by 20 inch painting, you don't times it, you plus it. So it's 20 plus 20 is 40. So 20 plus 20, so 40 inches overall. And if you price it at $25 per unit, that's an $1,000 artwork. And then if you have an 80 by 80 inch artwork, that's 80 plus 80, so 160 inches, makes it a $4,000 artwork, which is like a reasonable jump in terms of size and its price point. But if you did square inch, it's a bit harder. So it would be 20 times 20 is 400. So at $1,000, that's $250 per square inch. But if it's 80, it's 80 times 80, which is 6,400, which makes your work 16,000. That's a large jump. So just taking those into consideration, no formula is one size fits all, but it's just something to just take into consideration. So in my opinion, I think United Inch is just a better way of doing that if you were to go that way. You can also price tier. So you can say all of these paintings within, a 30 to 40 inch range are at this price. Anything under that is this price. Anything above that is this price. You can price range like that as well. Yeah, I'm a collector myself. I love buying emerging artists' work. My collection is mainly emerging art. And as somebody who goes to I've been to the Toronto Outdoor Fair a couple of times. I go to the Artist Project. I love it when artists explain their work. Is there a story behind it? Did you switch from painting and drawing to ceramics? Why did you do that? And so just kind of getting a real feel for the artist and the dedication that they have. That's just, I know that has nothing to do with pricing your artwork, but as a buyer, I think it's so important that you show that you love what you do and you love the art that you produce, especially when somebody shows interest in it. And invite them back to your studio. People love studio visits. It's great. So anyways, that's kind of, that's my thing.
They love connecting to the personal story for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, great. So, I'll kick off with a few questions, and then meanwhile, I hope our audience is some questions are brewing in their minds as well. So, Toronto's an expensive city to live in. Mm-hmm. How do you establish that base price that you're using in your formulas for the actual labor?
I think you need to take that one away.
Yeah, again, cost does factor in, right, in terms of living. And I think for me, it's just trying to be very resourceful right from the get-go. Coming out of school, I didn't just do it on my own. I didn't go and rent out a big space and expect to afford it. I pulled together with a collective, and we did it as a group of 7, and then we had 13. It was kind of like a smaller version of what Akin is today, probably, but run by artists. It was all DIY, us doing it and supporting our community that way. and using our skill sets or different skill sets and resources collectively. And so that's how we did it initially. And so if you're doing a show, you make friends with people next to you. You rent a van together and to go to a fair. You pick it, like you need to, having that community is really important to do that. That said, I have transitioned from having a studio outside of my space to having one at home. I'm raising a family with my partner, so and that just became easier to subsidize my costs during my art career. So yeah, just be resourceful.
And then
absolutely.
Yeah, and then I'll say
for survival.
And then I'll say so. Like in Toronto, at least as of 2022, like a livable hourly wage, which I don't know how people live on this. Maybe is $23.15 an hour, and of course, it doesn't take a genius to know that minimum wage has just been increased astronomically to $16.50 an hour, which is
55.
sadly, $16.55, which is sadly much below a livable wage in a city like Toronto. So, do you think it's reasonable for an artist to say my hourly wage should be $23.15 an hour times these number of hours plus the cost of supplies, knowing that you could work 40 or 60 or 80 hours a week preparing for a show where maybe you don't sell everything?
Right.
For sure. One thing that I would think is it's hard right off the bat, because when you are starting out with your practice, it's going to take you longer to create a work. You're still building your skills. So that's hard because you're going to be adding way more hours. You're going to be inputting many more hours than you would, say, 5 years down the line, where you're going to be a much more prolific in a shorter amount of time. So I think that is one factor that you have to kind of consider. It's tricky. It's hard. I'm not going to lie. I'm lucky in the sense that I'm very passionate about teaching as well, and I've worked. We were talking about this earlier. Just having, it fluctuates from year to year, and I think that when you're looking at the longevity of something, I always say to young artists coming out is don't have all your eggs in one basket that you're depending on. You want to kind of have things in 2 or 3 things at all times, because when something kind of dips down, you can balance out with something else. So yeah, and it's important for your longevity in this career to have that flexibility if you can.
I'll say like mathematically, $23.15 an hour if you're working 40 hours a week works out to $48,000 a year, which is $2,000 lower than what the government considers the top of the range for a tax credit. So even at $23.15 an hour, which is considered a livable wage for Toronto, you're still essentially qualifying for some kind of government subsidization in a way. So realistically, I would say if you're out there as a working artist, understand that your time should be much more valuable than $23.15 an hour, because no one should be expected to be working somewhere between the poverty line, which is about $27,000 a year, and this government tax credit at $50,000 a year. So give yourselves that boost and recognize that your work should be valued more than the bare minimum. I suppose from a gallerist perspective, so what happens when an artist is now, we'll say, like accepted into a gallery? How does that affect the pricing of their work?
I think it affects it in the sense that they don't get the full package anymore. They don't get the full sale rather anymore because they have somebody working on behalf of them. So, typically 5 days a week, depends on what gallery it is, could be 7, promoting their art and selling more of it. It also depends on the medium. So if you're an artist who has prints, there's an artist who could make a painting and put it into a print. So your painting is one, you spent 20 hours on this painting, but then you can make prints out of it, and those prints can take 20 seconds. Again, not putting all your eggs in one basket. If that's the way that you'd like to go, it's just kind of monetizing. And I know that might be a dirty way of thinking about it. And I am sorry, but the idea of the monetization of it in a different way. $500 for a print, $7,000 for your painting. It's easier to make money that way from a gallery perspective because you've got more inventory to push out and promote. But I to be honest with you, I've all the emerging artists that I've personally, and I'm not just speaking on behalf of my dealers, but me as somebody who's been a gallerist that I've worked with, they've come in and they've said, this is the price I've been working at it with. And we bump it up maybe 10% to cover wiggle room cost of discounts, but then you leave it with us and we promote the heck out of you. Shows, think about galleries as real estate. If you're renting a space like in a fair or even like something like UrbanSpace Gallery, if you rented this space, how much money that would be per day. A gallery is very similar. If you think about it, wall space is like real estate. If your painting is on the wall for a month and they have 20 people walk through every day, like that's important. That's in itself, valuable if you look at it in that sense. So I think that there is, I don't think it's as black and white as everybody wishes it were. But yeah, there's just something like that to consider as well.
So I will say, and I will say, never apologize. Never apologize for monetizing your work. Every other profession out there in the world monetizes their work. Mm-hmm. You go to a doctor, they earn money. You go to a lawyer, they earn money. You go and get Starbucks, you pay a lot of money for a cup of coffee that in reality costs them 10 cents. So never apologize for putting a price tag on your work. Trying to think of other questions that sort of like are occurring to me in this moment. I guess one question is, and I'm assuming both of you have dealt with this, is people who clearly want to buy something, can afford to buy something, but are fishing for that discount. Mm-hmm. And so technically this is not like how you price the work, mm-mm, but how do you manage that? How do you navigate that situation?
I can tell you how we manage that situation. It depends on where the artist is in their career. So there are certain artists where it's okay to give a 15 to 20% discount just due to the fact of how popular they are in a gallery, and how much work they're producing and selling. Sometimes it doesn't even affect the overall, what they get from a gallery. However, it's an emerging artist. You typically can sit down your buyer and say, we promote and support emerging artists in this space, and we can't go anything over 10%. And you say no. And that, one, it shows your buyer that you stick up for your artists. There's nothing more sexy than a good working relationship between a gallerist and an artist. And it's really important. Trust is very important. Art is not a necessity. I want it to be, but it's not, especially in today's economy. Who knows what's going to happen, tomorrow? But art is something that is, it's not the first thing you go when you don't need it every week. It's not like groceries. So building trust and building a relationship with not only your artists, but your buyers, is really important. So sticking up for your artists shows your buyers that you as a dealer, you as a gallerist are committed to their career. And that's important.
Gallery ethics, we were talking about earlier. Gallery ethics. And so as an artist, what happens if someone...
you will get a very wide range of people that come up to you and connect to you in different ways at an art show. You do get people who want to know more of your story, what your work is about, and you can see that their work, your work has meaning to them, and you build that connection. And you know, then you get people who do haggle and maybe don't really have as much or as passionate about what you're working on, but just want a deal. And I usually say no, because I don't want to come out of that situation feeling icky. Yeah, good word. I don't want to come and be left and it's hard. Sometimes at art shows, they don't always go the way that you think that they will. You might have a phenomenal show, and sometimes for various reasons, you might not have one great show, but just, you know, just believe in yourself and that the work that you have, hold on to it, because just giving it away, it's going to be that much more to replace it than afterwards, but at least it might not be sold in that moment, but you might have it for the next show, another opportunity. Somebody who's going to really appreciate it will come along and is going to enjoy it, and it's going to be meaningful to them, because you know they might pay a little bit more, but they you know got it because they loved it. So yeah, so hold on to it. Don't sell yourself short. Yeah.
Also, don't be afraid of payment plans too.
Yes.
I know galleries are able to, most galleries, I shouldn't say all galleries, but most galleries are able to finesse a payment plan for a buyer. It helps spread out payments for that buyer. It helps it make it more realistic for them to achieve a goal of collecting, a little bit more attainable, a little bit more inclusive. Not everybody has $1,000 to put right up front, but they can do $250 over the course of 4 months. That's that's something also to be cognizant of. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll say in terms of payment plans, that was another question that I would have had is...
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You know, so a lot of artists and galleries, I mean, I've done payment plans with both. For artists, I think there's sometimes a little bit more flexibility in terms of the length of that payment plan, because for the artist, it becomes sort of like they can anticipate every month for 6 months or 12 months they're going to get this chunk of money. So if we're like, who doesn't like to get $2,500 up front, but you know, maybe it's not so bad to get $200 a month for, you know, 12 months. For galleries, I find very often, because they're operating show to show, they might do a payment plan that, you know, is like, this show is for 8 weeks, and so you could pay a bit now and a bit at the end of the month and a bit at the end of that show, but they have to reconcile their books at the end of that show and move on to the next project. So, you know, it's definitely something worth thinking about. Totally. It's like, certainly as an artist, like what's your tolerance for someone saying, I really love your work, I just don't have that amount of money right now, could we do a payment plan? So definitely something to consider. So I think at this stage, I'm going to turn to you, our audience, and ask, are there burning questions in your mind?
I'll segue into works on paper versus canvases in terms of pricing. You still do the same rules with that, and with representation, like you kind of, like it's tricky, and so I don't know.
It is totally tricky.
Yeah, so pricing works on paper. Is that a similar process to pricing, let's say, an oil painting or an acrylic?
Yes, and I think yes and no. I think it's similar in the sense of you can use similar formulas, but I think you have to put your price points a little bit lower for drawings and works on paper. Historically, canvas works typically go for more. The materials cost more. They're paintings versus drawings. Not that that's not a hierarchy. I don't mean it like in any way like that. But speaking with a couple of my colleagues, that was something that was brought up, where it was like, if somebody's painted on paper, or if it's a drawing on paper, and then the artist also has canvas works, typically their canvas works are always priced a little bit more.
And then I think there's a big difference than if you're talking about like limited edition prints. Then you're into like, that's opening a whole different ball game.
But one of the things is like you're paying for the framing as the artist as well. So
are you?
Right. So I have representation.
Amazing.
But I'm responsible for the finished product.
Okay.
So that all of a sudden, to put that into my costs,
Yeah.
it becomes very high.
Yeah.
So how do it's mixed media on paper, so it's always on paper.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean,
No.
yeah, so I wonder, so I mean, talking about like that you are covering the cost of framing, so I guess the question is, then when it comes to the gallerist, you sort of like, we'll say like adding their commission,
Yeah.
does that take the framing into account or just the work in the frame?
So they usually ask me what the charge of, like what the cost of the frame is.
Yeah.
Right.
And you tell them, correct? I
Yeah,
hope so.
They frame it for me.
Okay.
And I also have to ship it somewhere.
Okay.
So there's a lot of costs that incur.
Right.
And so I'm trying to like balance it out so it's not so crazy because I've covered the whole cost at the beginning.
Yeah.
I hope to get it back, but it might be a lot all at once.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, wow.
so I don't know.
So, and you have gallery representation, and they're not in Ontario. Okay. And is there a framer where they are?
So they have a certain size that they can frame for me, and otherwise I just sent it and said, please have your framer do it, because the cost of shipping it out there
Yeah.
is really
Shipping is
Yes.
crazy.
it is
Yeah.
one of the largest expenses
Yeah.
for any gallery.
Right.
That's
Yeah, kind of after rent.
yeah.
Shipping.
Not even sometimes depending on where they are.
Oh,
Yeah, shipping can definitely overtake rent depending on where they are. It's crazy. I don't know if I have an answer for you, and I'm really sorry about that. I think I have not worked in a space where the artist is responsible for the framing.
Okay.
I would build that
Yeah.
into. I would. Yeah.
Back into the cost.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
probably how I would do that. Yeah. What would you say?
Absolutely built.
Okay.
I think just having a price point framed or unframed and
Yeah.
then working that in.
Right.
Yeah, because sometimes people will want to kind of go with their own framing. So, yeah.
Unless like your work is like specifically framed like that. I have a photograph of old bills, and the framing has to be the way the art like he had such a vision, and it works. So he showed how to get it framed, and I paid for the framing as the buyer. So I don't.
I mean, I know there's a photographer in Quebec who he takes photographs, but then he has the frames powder coated to match the background in the photograph.
Cool.
So yeah, so the framing is a part of the work. It's like integral. So, but yeah, I mean, I think like if you are responsible for the work inside the frame and the frame, then that is your cost, and so then that is the cost that then the gallery has to
Or the
build
buyer.
or the buyer.
I don't know your work, but I mean, are there other options? Like, can you take your paper and mount it onto board and try that? And just seeing, yeah. Yeah, because then it becomes part of panel, right? Yeah, just exploring other options and being creative with that so that it can help you in that area, in that price point.
Awesome. Okay, I think we had one more question here.
So there are several like square foot style shows across the city where the host like determines that. Yeah.
So I'm part of AWOL Gallery, and we started the square foot show
Okay.
years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had, I think, at a
12
High
by
Peak
12
is great.
paintings, and
Yeah.
the host usually determines that you have to sell it for $300.
Right.
So what is the like pros and cons of artists at different stages of their career all selling at the exact same price point?
That's also a really good question.
Okay, okay, so I'm not going to address the pros and cons. Maybe the two of you could. What I will say is, if you are producing a work that is 12 by 12, knowing that it is being sold for $300, it is up to you to determine how much you will be touching that 12 by 12 inch surface. So if you decide you are going to spend hours and hours and hours on it, that's kind of on you, right? So they're telling you this is how much it's going to be, and so now you gauge the amount of work you're going to invest in that. So I think that's fair. But what about like pros and cons?
I think pros. We started that show actually years ago. Part of it was our way of being able to support our studio, and I think at its peak had 1,700 works in it. It took us 2 weeks to install with like 10 installers. Yeah, it was huge. I mean, pros and there was a set price, and the whole idea, was trying to give everybody an even playing field, whether it was somebody who was further along in their career or somebody starting out, and it gave the vantage point that if you're doing a show with a large number of artists, the visibility and the traffic of people getting to see your work. And I've had people starting out at that point who have gone on to gallery representation, and that's where I got. I was able to afford one of their artworks. And I think, but you're not giving like 10 pieces or like what you would to your commercial gallery, the amount of work, like it's 1 or 2 pieces, right? So I think that you want to just, for me, it would be consideration of like, it would be like advertising cost. And that's how I usually went into it, because I think typically people who are keeping an eye on your work would know that this is not typical for you to have this at this price. So it's an opportunity if they want, and then again, it's the same thing. Like how much work you put into it is how you want your name or your work to be shown amongst so many other people, right? So it's a little bit of a decision.
Like below that price point, like does that kind of, like are those kinds of artists accepted into those kinds of shows?
It depends on the requirements of each show. I don't know. We kept it open. We had kids doing it with their parents. We had people. It was more about being inclusive. So it's really the mandate of the gallery that you're working with, because some of those shows are also juried, right? It depends. I mean, there's so many different variations. So I think it's just kind of seeing what they've done with the show and what they're proposing out there, what their advertising is, and see how other artists who is doing it, right? And see, some of them are anonymous, right? Like it's really fun. You discover the artist, but there's so many different ways of doing it, so it's fun. Yeah.
Some way at the back.
Yeah.
I'm asking this question in context of Toronto Outdoor Art Fair and different types of mediums that artists showcase. And I think most of the discussion is kind of like it's easier to price paintings in oil, acrylic, works on paper. I'm curious about how you approach pricing ceramic works. Do you have transitions so you can speak to that? Or sculpture, and then you go into photography, and something that if you can speak to different types of media and share some insight on that too.
I think, as a sculptor, there's a difference between a ceramicist doing production work of mugs and then somebody who's doing an original sculpture, right? Or somebody who's doing the in-between, kind of doing some of it in production and with added detail. So you're kind of you're looking at and trying to find that kind of happy place in pricing. Again, still being able to cover your cost and whatnot. And I think, it lends itself to like the discussion about drawing on paper. Some of them are doing high realism with hours and hours and hours of work where just you looking at it, you can tell that this, even if it's a work on paper, I would think that the value of that would be much more, than somebody who's doing a gesture drawing, for example, or so. I don't know. I think you have to kind of balance out, what the work is about, and how long it took an artist to build those skills to get there, right?
Is
So
the formula like what you're talking about, the United Square Inch as a base, or
yes.
is there anything that you would say a ceramicist would use, or?
Unfortunately, typically it's kind of like illustration for ceramics. It's always like, oh, it's a little bit less. I would think if you're doing, because my process is a little bit more like I'm doing an original sculpture, but I'm making a mold, so I'm able to get 50 to 100 of something, and then I integrate it. some of them are integrated more. So it really, it's, yeah, I have to kind of put into all of those considerations. Like if I'm doing an original sculpture, it's going to be more than if it's something that is cast and I'm able to do, 50 or 100 and get that out of that mold. I can definitely do less. So for as a ceramicist, that definitely comes into play.
Yeah, and then I'll say, so, and then, like broadening the conversation into things like, bronze sculpture, marble sculpture,
very expensive,
glass, right? So all of a sudden now you're taking into account. So do you have your own foundry? Probably not. So you're going to be working with a foundry. You're going to be working with technicians. You're paying for the bronze itself. Odds are, once it's been cast, it has to be polished. It has to be patinated. So all of these steps become your cost as an artist and have to translate into the cost that you're now charging whoever's going to buy that work. If you're thinking of glass, so there's the actual glass raw material isn't that expensive, but the equipment is very expensive. Odds are you probably don't own your own you probably don't own your own suite of equipment. You're a kneeler and so on, glory hole and so on. So all of a sudden you're renting a studio or you're a member of a studio. So you're paying your membership fee. You're paying for all of your colors and so on and so on. So every little bit and piece goes in. Now, one thing you did mention is photography. So photography is a really tricky one because, of course, nowadays, most photographers, I will say regrettably, but most photographers are working digital. But there are still some who are working in the more traditional formats. So all of a sudden, you're now, you need a dark room, you need all the chemicals, you need silver nitrate, and in order to process those older traditional prints. If you're working in digital, while it's true the process may be more instantaneous, really good quality printing is really going to cost you a lot of money, a lot of money.
Yeah,
and as you say, it's like if you go from a 12 by 12 to a 20 by 20, the price jumps are enormous when you start to get into larger and larger format prints.
Yeah.
And again, all of that has to go in. I would also say, so you're working in paper and framing the work. I know that certainly there are people who buy work and like to have that preference of their own framing. I will differ with some people and I say I really think that the framing should be an artist's consideration. Maybe you're not framing it, but maybe when someone buys it, you could say, as the artist, I would prefer if the frame was something, name a color, name a style. But that after all, it is about showing your work to its best advantage. And so that framing should be something that you can at least try to influence. So that it's not just I bought this work because it matches my blue sofa and I'm going to put it in a blue frame, right? So did that answer the question enough? Yeah. Other perspectives?
I was just going to say there's a few galleries, at least there's one gallery in the city who's very dedicated to photography, the Stephen Bolger Gallery, or even G44 being in this building, artist run. Those are really great resources to go for photography specific, just to even look at what their works are priced at, because I know Stephen has a wide range of very established artists and also very emerging artists as well. But I know photography is a bit of a tricky one in terms of its price point. So yeah, sorry.
Awesome. Yeah, please.
Do you charge more for a commission?
Charge more for commission.
Or if the gallery asks you to do a commission?
I think it depends on your relationship with your gallery. Sometimes galleries upfront costs for you to do work, like they will cover your like costs, right? So if they ask you to do it, or if somebody asks you to do a commission, it's really up. I think it's up to you as an artist what you're comfortable with. I've worked with artists who are happy to do commissions. They also turn those commissions into like other monetary like things, whether it be prints or they utilize the same kind of aesthetic in other works. But I think it's the medium you're working in. I also think it's what your relationship with the gallery is too. Like I've worked with artists who are not comfortable, and I don't have a great working relationship. They're either new, and somebody's like, "Oh, I wish they could do this in black," and they're like, "Well, I don't work in black," so it's a no. Keeping your integrity. So.
I think it's personal to you. I mean, some artists refuse to do commissions because there's always a tendency that somebody doesn't like it and then doesn't get the piece and doesn't take it, and then you're out the cost. Most galleries that I've worked with will tend to take a little bit less of a percentage on commission, so that more is going to you because they're actually not don't acquire any cost to showing the work and advertising the work, so they'll take a less of a percentage. So yeah, I mean it's really up to you. I tend to make stuff and say, can you do something in this?
Yeah, and then what I would say, and I mean, and I've had lots of conversations with artists. So I always say about a commission, guaranteed, hands down, 50% upfront.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because you have to protect yourself if, as Sandra points out, at some point they say like, "Oh, it's not going the direction I like." Well, so you need that assurance upfront.
That said, I've done commissions for people that have sparked new ideas and have brought me into a whole new body of work. So I usually try not to put the pressure on myself and say, I'll make something with what you're saying, and but it has to be something that I like too, and I'll give a direction to it and say, this is what I'm going to do. It could be, it could be close to what you want, but I'm not going to guarantee it. And I'll make it, and I'll say, if you like it, you can take it, and if you don't, at least I'm happy with it, that I'll exhibit it outside of this. So I just say I call them suggested ideas rather than that, because sometimes commissions can be a bit of a nightmare if it doesn't work out. Yeah,
absolutely.
So what about limited editions? How do you price that?
Oh yeah, limited edition.
I think that there's a few ways of doing it. It depends on, are you talking about prints or are you talking about photography? Prints.
Of the original artwork.
Of the original artwork.
Yeah.
So I've worked in spaces, and I know galleries will do, so if you have 50 prints, the first 40 go for X amount, and the last 10 go for more.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It's a reserve. They're popular. Also APs, artist proofs or printer proofs, those can also go for more money due to the fact that historically artists would hold those back for family and friends or for their own archives for potentially a retrospective. And so there's a limited number of them, 4 or 5. And so those would be more money, but you can tier it that way. I know photography prints also go like that as well. Depending on the size, like there'll be 3 sizes, and the last 5 of those sizes go for $250 more or $500 more, just because they are now more of a hot commodity. Okay. People have bought them.
I always thought it was the first.
However you want to do. I think it's dependent on however you would like to do it. It can be artist choice. As somebody who's collected prints before, I ask for the number 14. It's my favorite number. Some artists grant me it, and some artists say, "Sorry, you get what you get out of the print run."
Yeah, and I think another factor to consider when it comes to limited edition is how do you define limited?
Yeah.
So we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
Like for me, as someone who has bought limited edition works, I would literally never. I would absolutely walk away if I heard that a limited edition was more than 20. For me, that is now just equivalent to a poster that anyone could put up anywhere. So for me, limited is like 20, and that's including APs. So
Sure.
2 APs and 18, or however you divvy that up. But I do agree. I mean, I think APs generally are held back for either exhibition or museum acquisition, or like placement with very special collectors. So I think of APs as, you know, one step up for sure.
Yeah.
But then within the rest of the run, again, it's sort of up to you. Like, do you hold back like those last 2 that are not APs, or the last 5, or the last 10? How do you then want to treat that? Because like anything else in the economy, it's supply and demand. So if you have 20, as they sell, the ones that remain, there are fewer and fewer of them.
And I don't have a formula for you. Like if you sold your original for X amount of dollars, so your prints would be X amount of dollars. I don't have a formula for you, but
Yeah.
I will happily grab your information and I will ask my colleagues, and I will see what they would do, and I could happily share that with you.
Okay.
Because I understand, you know, it's kind of a shot in the dark a little bit, and I get that.
And do you usually do the most one that's in demand? Like, because I did a lot of work where they always ask for the same theme and the same theme.
Okay.
And then I started doing limited editions of them, but I didn't know, like, those were the ones that I said, okay, I'm gonna put this in print because they keep asking me to paint them over and over again.
Yeah.
So
That's a great way though to
Yeah.
monetize your work further, and to also give people an accessible price point.
Yeah.
Right? So like as somebody who could be a budding collector, I couldn't afford your $5,000 painting, but I can afford your $250 print.
yeah, and that's what
And the limited
yeah.
edition is not 20. I wouldn't price it at $250 if it's 20.
Right.
Yeah.
I personally, but I think that maybe you could do it a little bit, like your run would be larger.
Yeah, 'cause I
75.
used to do Giclées,
Yeah.
the Giclées limited edition, but I always,
Right.
I never knew really how to price them based from the original.
Yeah. And then I would also say, I mean,
I'll ask around. I'll grab your
like that,
information and I
yeah.
can absolutely ask around.
Please, okay.
yeah. And then I'll also say, I think as an artist, you owe it to the person who has the original painting
Yeah.
to make sure that they know your intent, or that there's a possibility that there will be a limited edition print run of that image, because for them it may then turn them off from buying that work. Or if they've already bought it, to now find out, oh my gosh, there are going to be 50 more images of this, so I'll have the original painting, but 50 more people.
But doesn't it increase the
Not
value
for
of
them.
the original?
Not for them.
It could.
Not necessarily.
It could.
I'll say not necessarily. Okay. Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but the original will always be more valuable
Yeah,
because
of
it is
course.
the original.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that you're supposed to maintain a constant price, right? But say like I have something on my website where shipping is additional, but if I go on an online gallery, they want you to include the shipping in. So then the price is going to be higher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something which is like explainable then?
Wow.
I'm not sure from my perspective, just due to the fact that like gallerists will like work out whatever shipping is like with their buyers. It's not really website, and if it's a print, it's typically Shopify is a standard purchasing method on websites, and it'll add it to your bill.
Yeah, well, and the shipping varies based on what the work is
Yeah.
and how far it's going.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think there always has to be that base price of like, this is the price of the work,
Yeah.
and then shipping is extra. Like, I don't know how you incorporate it. If you're sending something from Toronto to Hamilton or Toronto to Paris, you're going to have
Are
very
you
different
speaking
shipping.
about your shipping cost to that gallery, or are you speaking of
I
the
heard that
shipping
some,
cost of to the customer?
Like if you wanted to participate in some online galleries,
Mm-hmm.
they tell you that the price has to include shipping already,
Yeah,
or they give you a certain amount
To get it to them?
for you to sell it. Yeah. on
Oh,
the thing.
because the shipping cost will vary depending on
Yeah.
where the buyer is. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
If they're
I mean, you
taking
would
it
have to
off.
charge, you'd have to add on like $1,000 because
Yeah.
I mean, it cost, I don't know, I mailed something from here to Miami Beach, and it literally had filled, it was like an envelope, regular envelope, and I had to pay $40 for shipping. So if you're selling an artwork in Miami, I mean, I can't imagine how much that would cost.
I would talk to your online
Right.
gallery and see if
Yeah.
there's any way around that, or if there's just any clarification.
Yeah, yeah. Well, awesome. I mean, thank you so much for coming, everyone in our audience.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra and Mackenzie.
Thank you.
Of course, my biggest thanks really go to TOAF, Anahita Azrahimi, who's at the back, and Anya Pasternak, and other support staff. I think this is a really great series, you know, as we chatted, to really dive into topics that artists don't learn in school, generally because these are topics that many instructors are just not really prepared to talk about in school. They want to encourage you to be artists and be creative and dream of amazing artworks to make for those of us who look at them and appreciate them and exhibit them and teach from them. And so that's we'll say a non-pragmatic world that really has nothing to do with things like pricing necessarily. So please do come on back on November 8th. Again, we'll be hearing from Iris Hausler and Cal Mansour about carving a path to international representation. Please support TOAF in any way that you can. Please apply before December 1st to participate in 2024. And keep track of the programs that will come in early 2024 as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, folks.